All right, well, we'll kick it off. So my name is Malik Ducard. I am Director of Content Partnerships at YouTube, and it's such a great honor to have the cast and the producers from 12 Years a Slave, directed by Steve McQueen. Truly is an honor. And we have with us here today Chiwetel Ejiofor, who plays the title character Solomon Northup, Lupita Nyong'o, who plays Patsy, Alfre Woodard, who plays Mistress Shaw, Dede, Gardner, and Jeremy Kleiner from Plan B, who are producers on the film. So thanks again, and welcome to Google Los Angeles. And we know that it's a very, very busy time. It's award season, lots of red carpets, and we wanted to also start with congratulating you for the Golden Globe for Best Drama, so deserved, and another round of applause. Actually, I have a question. How heavy is that actual Golden Globe, and is it made out of gold?
Well, Steve never let go of it.
Well, would love to one day hold it. We'd love to kick it off with a quick, short trailer from the film to tee things up. So,
Solomon Northup is my name. I'm a free man.
If you want to survive, say as little as possible.
There is no justice in this slavery.
Man does how he pleases with his property.
I did as instructed.
There's something wrong. It's wrong with the instruction.
In his own time, God will manage them all.
I will not fall into despair. I will keep myself hardy till freedom is opportune.
12 Years a Slave.
I was a free man. I'm not a slave.
Rated R.
Talk about the story behind the story. Like I think that it's fascinating from a couple of different standpoints. It doesn't seem like it's like the very first movie on Hollywood's list to make, and thank God that you guys created the movie. But can maybe we start with the producers, Dede and Jeremy. Can you tell us the story behind the story around the creation of the movie?
Sure. We met with Steve McQueen 5 years ago. We saw Hunger before it even premiered in Toronto, and were blown away. And we asked to sit down with him and have a meeting and say, we think you're amazing, and we'd love to try and find something to do with you. And he said, well, what does that mean? But it evolved into a conversation about things that matter to us, and he asked us a really simple question. He said, why do you think it is that no American film has really addressed the institution of slavery, the day in, day out experience of what that decades and decades long era of American history was? And we said we didn't know, with humility and some distress. And we said, why don't we try? And that was honestly the very, very beginning.
Right.
That, picking up from that point, and Steve had very clear ideas about certain elements of it. The screenwriter John Ridley became involved in the project. At a certain point in the process, Steve's partner Bianca found, or came across, because it existed, but came across this incredible book, Solomon Northup's Memoir, which I would encourage everyone, if you have an opportunity to read this piece of material. It's an incredible, overwhelming, devastating, heartbreaking story, and that became the basis of what we then turned into a screenplay. That got us to starting to shoot the movie in June of 2012. It was a fairly quick process after the recognition that the manuscript was the basis of the movie that Steve had in his mind.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic, and I hadn't heard of the story. I'm sure many of us, hadn't heard of it before you brought that out. I even took African American Studies classes in college. My mom came of age in civil rights era in Harlem in the '60s, and none of us heard it. And you guys found this great material. So thank you. I do want to ask a question for Lupita. Your portrayal of Patsy was so strong, was so truthful, and you've gone on an amazing ride. You came out of Yale Drama School not that long ago, and now you're on red carpets and awards. And what's your journey been like?
Oh my! It's been It's been an adventure. It's been a lot. It all started with Steve calling me to offer me this part, and that in itself was a life-changing experience, having the opportunity to embody such a phenomenal woman that Solomon Northup described as having an air of loftiness that neither labor nor lash could rid her of. I mean, it was such a privilege, and I thoroughly enjoyed playing Patsy, and then there was this long wait, and then the press begun, and you ready for what's about to happen? And my answer was always, no, I have no idea what's about to happen. But I was surrounded by people who've been through it before and who have been so supportive of me from the very beginning. So I've never felt alone or panicked as such, because I've had backup. So it's been a lot of fun, and I'm just so happy for how this film has been received. It's not easy subject matter, but the fact that people are embracing it the way they have and engaging with it is very exciting.
Absolutely. And Chiwetel, can you tell us about the call that you got when you were offered the role? I've read or heard or saw that you weren't sure. You paused. You had to think about it. And what drew you to the role, but also what frightened you or scared you about the role?
Yeah, I was quite intimidated by it actually. In the end, when Steve called me, I'd known actually like Dede, I'd known Steve for a while. Ever since Hunger, I went out to Amsterdam, to where he lives, to have coffee with him and just to walk and talk about film and about life, and I wanted to work with him, and we wanted to try and find something to do together. And so I was excited to get the call, that he had this project that he wanted me to look at, and so he sent it to me, and obviously I was stunned by the story, like everybody else. I'd never heard of Solomon Northup, never heard of this story. I'd never seen a film from inside this experience, inside the slave experience. I kind of concluded there wouldn't be one somehow. That the received information was always that it's impossible to do. That you need to approach this material from a kind of oblique angle. You can't just have a story that talks about the experience from somebody who was inside the experience, from the perspective of a slave themselves. So I'd kind of, in a weird way, accepted that, and so when I read the screenplay, I didn't even see Solomon really in it the first time. I saw it as a story of somebody, a man who went through this kind of extraordinary experience, and I remember feeling the weight of that. And I looked at the story, and I looked at his journey in the context of like the wider conversations about race politics, about slavery, about making films about slavery, about the pressure, the responsibility. And all of those things kind of intimidated me, and I didn't want to be the guy at the center of something that in the end wasn't what I wanted it to be because I somehow had let it down. I felt that because Solomon was in every scene, in every sequence of the film, that I had to be absolutely sure that I could get to all those places. In the end, of course, I realized that I was thinking with completely the wrong part of my head, and Steve was quite surprised by my initial reaction. And so I went back anyway to read the book. And as I was looking at the book, I realized, of course, that was the point. The point wasn't that I had to worry about any of those things. There was something in the way that the book is written, and the way Solomon talks about his story, that you realize that this is a sober reflection on a man's life over this period of time. And he writes about it with such poetry, with such humility, with such a kind of understanding of the human experience, the human spirit, a kind of three-dimensional reality. The way he talks about all the other people in the story, and giving them their due, giving them their respect. There were no two-dimensional or one-dimensional characters. He got to know all these people very well and talks about them as human beings. And it becomes that very beautiful thing of a first-person historical narrative that sends you right back into a time and place, a primary source. And I guess at that point, I realized that I was connecting with that, and I didn't have to worry about the kind of the historical, geopolitical, race politics of everything. And all of that was kind of nonsensical, and I don't know why I went down that path in the first place, but I did. And of course, at that point, when I realized my responsibility, my job was to tell Solomon's story as best I could. Yeah. But then I called Steve and apologized.
and there's something that The film is about African slavery in America, but it also seems like it's this wider canvas that the team, the creators that you painted. You tell the story of the horrors of slavery, the triumph over it, but it also seems to be about the overcoming of oppression just in the world in general. The Holocaust, crimes against women, human trafficking today. Was this film also a call to action or a reminder to look at what's right under our noses in 2014?
There's a shot of Solomon, and I'm forgetting when it comes, but he turns, he's gazing out, and then he turns and looks directly into the camera, directly at the audience. And Steve has said that he meant to drive home the point of when Solomon looks out at us, it's on you. Yes, this is a historical treatment, but what are you going to do with what you're seeing? So that was an intentional shot there.
Yeah, it's a story about engaging with what human respect means, and I think that's what the book was about. I think that the essential part of what Solomon Northup is talking about is human respect and human dignity, and that is something that, of course, can be applied to our age very directly, to every age, and that's fundamentally the relevance, I think.
And there's also, I spoke to a lot of, we crowdsourced a lot of these questions, and there seemed to be something like almost oddly familiar and accessible about the film. Solomon's a guy who lives in the city. We live in the city. He's got a family and kids. I have family and kids. He's got an opportunity to help his family, and we've all been there. And then everything suddenly changes. It was almost, and I don't want to read into it, but it felt like you were putting an on-ramp for us, no matter what race, no matter where you come from, an on-ramp into you're free, but here's how this other experience has been. Was that by design?
I think that stuff is in the story.
Right.
I mean, as it happens, that relatability. I think that it's right, though, that Steve understood that those elements made the story accessible, and he's talked about it at times as it's obviously based on a real person, but he's talked about it as almost like a fable, or something that has, for all of its complexity, its richness, its three-dimensionality, there's also an element of like a universal language quality of it that anybody can understand. And I think that as a filmmaker, I think he very astutely understood that allowed people to access this. And as Lupita said, one of the great aspects of this experience has been the public's receptivity and embracing of this movie for all, as Chiwetel said, the conventional wisdom about what is acceptable and what isn't, and what will people access and what will they not access.
Right.
I was just going to say also, when we have seen some really good attempts at looking at historically at a period during slavery, we could always sort of look at a distance. We could be emotional about it, but there was a distance there. And that's exactly what Solomon's story is. The gift of it is that we go in with him. And that's why people have such a visceral reaction to it.
They go on that journey.
And so, of course, people have talked about, how brutal it is, as well as beautiful. But again, I think Steve has said there's only 5, maybe six instances actually of violence in it. When you think of what we watch today, just on TV with all of the crime scene investigations, all those kind of things, what our teenagers are used to seeing happen to heads and things on screen, that it really isn't. But why it hits us so hard is how successful it is at bringing us in. We go in, as you say, down the rabbit hole with Solomon.
Right.
Take comfort, Patsy. Good Lord will manage apps. In his own time, good Lord will manage them all. The Curse of the Pharaohs, but a poor example of what wait for the plantation class. This is nice.
So Alfre, please. You portray another type of Southern women that history doesn't tell that story too often. You were once a slave, but you're now, or your character's a plantation owner's wife, and therefore also a slave owner herself. And she's got this almost surreal sense of esteem that Patsy's character connects to, and they have this really interesting relationship, and their lives are so different. Would love to hear more about what that relationship was and what each got out of it.
Well, I think what Lupita said about Patsy having the air of loftiness, I think Mistress Shaw, the same way as Epps and everybody else, she is an exceptional person, Patsy is. And it doesn't matter what station you put a person like that in, that is still going to come from them. There are women in that house. Mistress Epps is not getting invited to tea parties at the other plantation. But there are certainly women in every plantation house. There's lots of women, concubines, that's how life was. So there are people in her house that she could have tea with, but this person has shown this incredible sense of character, and you're drawn to her, so she recognizes that in Patsy. That's why I think she likes spending time with Patsy, because it makes her special. One thing that Mistress Epps has to do is she has to constantly try to feel special, because she knows how to do the form of I have arrived. That's why she forces Platt to sit with her, is that she knows, and everybody in the area knows, that he knows more words than her husband and all the other masters.
Right.
And so, but it is so self-centered, it doesn't matter what's going on with him or what's going to happen when he gets back. Let's have tea. So she has created her own little elite circle there. Those are people she wants to sit with, but at the same time, she is trying to get Patsy to use her attraction to elevate her state in life. And of course, Patsy doesn't do it, which makes her even more a person to be admired and drawn to. So I think that's the basis of what she wants from that relationship.
And Lupita, I'm curious, the scenery, the environment of this movie in Louisiana was so rich, and Steve's sort of bringing out the beautiful icons and imagery of the South, the plantations, the cotton fields, the weeping willows. I imagine it must have been like living in history, in your very real present as well. What was it like being on set, but also being in that history?
I mean, it was so useful. I can't imagine this film being shot any other place, because the history is so present in Louisiana. The oak trees that were surrounding us were like 300 years old, so they'd witnessed people like Solomon and Patsy, and they're probably black people who'd hang from those trees, and so it was always very present. And also, the heat is a character of its own. You prepare. I was preparing in Massachusetts, and not in Massachusetts, in Connecticut for this role where I was living, and and then you get down to Louisiana, and everything changes in the heat. Your priorities change. You're like, do I really have to walk that far? Do I really need that sandwich right now? Because it's so hot, and so it changed my gait. It took me that extra mile into character to think about the fact that these were the conditions that these slaves were working under. They were picking cotton for how many hours in these conditions. Our first day on set was 108 degrees, and we were shooting the cotton picking scenes.
Oh, God.
So, you know, and it's back-breaking work as well, to bend over, and you have to have a plan. If you're going to pick 500 pounds of cotton a day, there's got to be a system in place. And so it was all so helpful. And I remember the first time I put on my costume, Patty Norris, the costume designer, she said to me that my clothes were from an actual slave, it was actual slave woman's garb. And I looked down, it had these intricate patchwork on the skirt, and I was just met with the fact that every single stitch on this skirt had a story, and I was standing in it, you know. And yeah, I mean, all those things helped so much with getting into character.
Right. I'd love to show another clip.
I went to Master Shaw's plantation.
You admit it?
Yes, freely. And you know why? I got this from Mrs. Shaw. Mrs. Epps won't even grab me no soap to clean with. I stink so much I make myself gag. 500 pounds of cotton, day in, day out, more than any man here. And for that I will be clean. That's all I ask. This here, what I went to Shaw's for.
And then we know where the scene goes after that. Can you tell us how did you prepare for that specific scene that day? Probably I guess one of the hardest days in Patsy's life, and I'm sure a hard day in your life as well.
Yeah, in the book, Solomon describes that day as one of the darkest days of all times. And that is significant considering how much violence there was on this plantation. He talks about hearing the crack of a whip from dawn to dusk on this plantation. So it was always something that I was aware was coming. But in preparing for Patsy always had an undercurrent of grief because that was the condition of her life. But I couldn't sentimentalize one day from another's day's work. For me, it was just making it practical, that was what I was going to have to do on Tuesday, you know? Right. But the day before, we did a scene in which I needed the wounds from previous whippings. Patsy has previous whippings before that one. And we had those put on my back, and it took 4 hours. And so the next day, I was looking at the call sheet and I saw that I was going to be in the makeup chair for 6 hours to do the pre-whipping and then the post-whipping scars. And I said to the makeup artist, Carla Davy, listen, I'm just going to go home with these scars so that tomorrow we can cut our work in half. And she loved the idea. So I went back to my hotel room and I tried to get some sleep. I had a very hard time sleeping the entire time that we were making 12 Years a Slave. But that night I slept even less because these scars were just ever so present on my back. And I was uncomfortable. I slept on my belly, and I was just haunted by these things on my back. And I remember weeping at night, and I was fretting to myself. And then it occurred to me that my discomfort was temporary, and the woman whom I was so privileged to portray, her discomfort was permanent. And it just put everything into perspective for the next day. And it was that one thing I needed in preparation for the next day that I could not have planned, you know. But it just really centered me and gave me just presence of mind for the next day's work. Because there was absolutely no other way that I could prepare for the humiliation and the heartbreak of being stripped naked and whipped. So anyway, the next day I got on set, and what I found on set was everyone so focused on the work at hand. So I wasn't going in it by myself, you know. I was going in it with my cast members, Chiwetel, Michael, Sarah, and we all needed each other to make it happen. I mean, it was our responsibility to just do the scene as honestly and openly as we could. And it was heartbreaking, but it was such a joy to be able to go there as well.
Well, It was amazing, and I have to imagine that it's going back and forth between that real history and then your real life, where one moment he's Epps, and in the next moment he's Michael. Just must have been jarring, but yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't actually. I don't think it was ever jarring. We all recognized that it was our job to do these, to play these roles, and Michael would have done us a disservice if he was any gentler. He went there full forcedly, and he was so scary. But it was exciting to be able to work with someone who was that committed, and to do it with people that you trust and gained extra respect for and love because of their commitment to their roles. It never was jarring to me. No.
And what was it like working with Steve McQueen? Alfre, you were quoted as saying he's making films that people will be talking about and watching 50 years from now. Tell us more about that style, and this is also open up to anyone who would love to hear more.
Steve, is from everything that I've seen of his from before, from Hunger, Shame, he just has an exceptional artistic quality. He's a true. Obviously he has an artistic background, but he's somebody who's involved in every aspect of filmmaking in a way that I do think is rare. That he is. That he just seems so born to it, and has this kind of depth of passion that matches his ability, and it means that you feel completely in safe hands in whatever he asks you to do, and wherever he's asking you to push, whatever avenue you're going to go down. You're never feeling that you can that you want to keep one foot on the dock and one on the boat. You're free just to get in the boat and sail away with him, and see whatever comes out of that. I've never shot a film in sequence, and I remember that in the first, just early on, I spoke to Steve about maybe shooting this in sequence, and he said he liked the idea, but that because of people's schedules, it just wasn't possible. So we had to shoot certain bits, in different. So we started on the Epps plantation actually. And so in a way that was very good for me, because I got to see Michael and Steve working together, and could just start to plug myself into that process. And what I kind of think I learned by that is the kind of freedom with which they approach the work, and the determination to find out absolutely everything that a scene can offer, to leave no stone unturned, and then to leave the scene, leave the moment, having left everything on the floor, and then go out and enjoy life. We had a great time as well making this film, and that's it's maybe surprises people, but we put a lot of passion into the days, and we were working at such a pitch. We had 35 days to shoot the film, so we had a total intensity while we were working on the project. People were coming and going because of the sort of odyssey nature of it. So there were parties for people who were arriving, actors who were arriving. There were parties for actors who were leaving. We were able to get out there and enjoy each other, get to know each other. And that is the kind of family relationship that Steve wanted to build on that set, because and all of that is part of allowing people to go to those places on the days, in the moments, in the heat, in whatever. I think by the end of it, we were prepared to do anything to tell the story with Steve, and he was a kind of fearless leader who was also prepared to go to any length to tell Solomon's story, and there was in the end no boundary to that. I think he's a remarkable filmmaker. For that reason, just the kind of depth of passion and ability.
Right. Yeah.
I wanted you to talk because I think the day that I arrived, because we had left Epps Plantation and because of the character of Mistress Shaw, I think we might have been working differently than was the style that he had already created. We actually sort of came up with it on the move, because if you're going to leave this very solid foundation that you've got, it can't be one of those little spare tires that you put on in your cars leaning to one side. And so we had to find it in motion in the day, and it was also something we had no frame of reference for. Right. So but the reason I came on was that I had seen all of Steve's work when it was happening, and so I said yes before I even knew what he wanted me to do. But for me, he is. I like working with people that I learn something each time out. You don't learn a lot, I'm gonna be honest, on movie sets anymore. It used to be, because there was a different work ethic, there was a different aesthetic and people came to their disciplines from a love of it from wherever they moved from in the world to do it. Now it's kind of like the Toyota factory moves to town and everybody chooses a department they want to specialize in, because we go to the places for tax incentives. But anyway, so he's one of those people that not only was I going to learn something about myself, I was going to learn something about the other departments. I was going to see, I was going to be told. He lets you know what he's seeing the whole time. And so, again, there's no separation between the actor and the director. And he's one of those people that tells you things you can actually activate. That is the main problem with directors. If they do speak at all, it's usually conceptual. I'm not going to get any more jobs, am I? But it's like having, and it's just heaven. It's like having the best piece of music, and you're at the top of your form as a musician, and you've got a maestro that is an extension of you yourself. I mean, it's just, I've said this, I would have gone to Kabul and pulled cable for him.
Wow.
Something that's just occurring to me is that I remember when Dede and I were in early conversations with Steve, he talked about the scene where Solomon is forced to whip Patsy. And it's like he understood that scene contained enormous power. And it's so remarkable to hear, these incredible actors talk about their experiences inside of that framework as if it was like almost but somehow he understood that even before that process happened and before the actors were cast. And that's that kind of musicality, organic, creative, evolving process that Alfre was just talking about. So I think we all left this experience with just enormous respect and admiration for Steve.
We'd love to talk a little bit about the completed film and how it's being received. And I want to start off with the Descendants of Solomon Northup. I saw the site that our friends at Fox put up, facesofsolomon.com. And if you guys haven't seen it, you have to check it out. It's almost like the real ending of the movie after the credits roll, because it's the great-great-great-grandson, the great-great-great-great-granddaughter, all posting videos. There's a woman who plays violin like Solomon and their bios, and it goes on in their lives. How have the Descendants embraced this movie, and how has that interaction been? What's been the feedback?
That's sort of been the best treasure hunt. In the wake of the film, we didn't know what we would find. I think there's been a Solomon Northup Day in Saratoga Springs every July for about 5 years, and I think last year it was attended by maybe 30 or 35 descendants, right? And it was a deeply intimate, thoroughly felt but local affair, but we had a thought that if the movie got seen and if it was well received and if it was discussed, that it would be found and that we would find these people and that they would find us. And it's been, it's such a thrill. I did a Q&A in DC for the Polaris Foundation, and during the Q&A this woman stood up and said, "I just want to say I am the great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Solomon," and read me the lineage, at which point I burst out crying. And she had her son with her, and now we got Christmas cards, and we've gotten emails and congratulations, and this website and the collection of people on it, the breadth of people of every race, color, shade, sex, age, skill, it is the most moving. And you think, this man lived as played by Chiwetel, and look who's here for it. But that just keeps coming. It's been amazing.
You know, that's one of the things about this film that is such a gift, and it gives us the possibility to jettison so forward into health and wellness as a culture, as a society, because Americans have not wanted to hear about slavery. Black people would say, you know what, this is going to bum me out, or I'm going to be so pissed off. And white people would say, you know, we didn't have any money. My people had money. We didn't own anything, or I wasn't there. It's like nobody wanted to look at that. And so, but when you cut off the things that you think are negative, you also cut off the incredible things that are born out of that. I mean, none of us would be here. We would not be a superpower if we had not had 300 years of forced labor. And that's a terrible thing, but and we are all related. The Genealogical Society in DC says that 65% of Caucasian Americans have significant black blood. So we try to like parcel up and eat on different sides of the cafeteria and all that. I know you all don't, but you eat by departments. But the truth is, it is a family history. It is our American family history. And when we embrace that, and it wasn't long ago, and when we embrace that, we begin to understand ourselves and accept ourselves. And we begin to understand each other or a little bit more. And most of the ills that we have thrown money and rap sessions and work sessions at since the 60s, you could just trace it right back. In 2014, the fact of how many incarcerated people are in this country and how many incarcerated people are black and brown men. But it traces right back to, and when you understand where a thing happens, you approach solutions in a different way. So all of that to say, and I this is an American story. And by that I mean that it's our history. It is a West African story. It is a history. It is a British story. It's all of that, everybody that's involved in that, and it informs us right today. And when we don't recognize that and embrace that, we lose out, first of all, on all the great things, but we also will constantly stay off kilter. I'm hoping that it is the beginning of being able to talk about solutions.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to thank you, and I'd love to cut to some questions. So if people can line up for the mic, but on that note, before we do that, we're Google. We love great art. We love great movies. Thank you. We also love data. And if we can go to the slide, want to talk depict a little bit around the conversation that this movie has really spurred on. So this is on Google.com search trends around the phrase 12 years a slave, but we also bundled in things like Solomon Northup and slavery, and you can see that there's not a lot of conversation happening around that. And then there's this surge when you release this great picture that's off the charts. And if we can go to the next slide, this is on YouTube.com. When you search for the phrase 12 years a slave, there's over 200,000 search results that come up. So this is clips that Fox is putting up, interviews that you guys are doing, discussions that are happening in the world. So you guys have really resonated and encouraged this conversation around slavery that hasn't happened in the way that it has now. So anyway, thank you. And
Thank you.
So why don't we cut to questions?
Hello, everyone. I just saw the film, and I just have to say it's been absolutely amazing, and thank you so much for that. This is our history. It's an American history, like you said. Was there a certain resolution or something that you all felt that, oh, I have to be this, or I have to do something, some kind of takeaway that you all had after the experience of making this film?
Well, it was, it's so all-encompassing, the experience. It was the most extraordinary experience of my life, as an actor and outside of being an actor. There was a remarkable sense of passion and of responsibility and privilege. And I feel like the process of making this film and the process of getting out this idea of engaging with human respect, is something that I think all of us can take into our lives, into our work communities, into all the social aspects of our existence. It's a very fundamental part of how we exist, and I think that this film encouraged me to continue to engage with those ideas and to do things that are in my power to support that. We're always kind of pushed to be divided somehow into genders, into races, into religions, into sexualities, and just left to kind of pitch it out and fight against each other. And I think that what films like this speak to is the nature of how divisive that is and where that can lead to. And I think we can all engage in our lives to reverse those trends.
Hi, I just want to say I love you all. Miss Woodard, you're probably one of my favorite actresses in the whole world. So, and it's such a privilege, but I've heard you speak. This particular role, how difficult did you personally find it? What did you do to prepare for it? How did you go about that?
It wasn't difficult at all, because I don't know how to describe it. When I take on a role, first not with Steve. I agreed before I even saw the script to be with Steve, but I read it, and while I'm reading, if by page 5, every time my part comes up, something happens emotionally on those lines while I read it, then I'm hooked. I usually put it away until probably the day before, maybe 2 days before I shoot. But what I start to do is just in my everyday life, I see where that person is from, the time period, the type of person, just by clues that what people say about them, you get ideas about them. So if I'm at, Whole Foods, I live in this area. I'm in Whole Foods, I'll just suddenly start to toy with dialect, finding that person, the way they speak, and I, start to toss in, just dialect, and so that it becomes natural. So I don't have to turn it on when I get there. I start to work on that person, the way that they move, the way that they walk, and their sensibilities. You have to leave behind any evidence of yourself to stand up and flesh out another person. That's what all of our training is about. They take you to a neutral point. So when you start to work, you build on that. How I feel about Mistress Shaw is absolutely of no importance, and especially it's detrimental to anything about it. All my responsibility is to find that person's reality. And I think about, you slowly start to take things on, what she would like to do, and I just kind of play that out as I'm moving around. I don't work on the words, because I think in real life we never know what we're going to say until we say it. So I want to know as little about what I'm going to say, more about defining who I am, being that person, standing in that person. So the one thing that I did with dialect, I felt terrible because I was so happy to be there that I was just kind of giddy because they had been working. You guys were all tired and it was hot, and they, Chiwetel had to run up the road and up the stairs. And the first time you ran up, we were going to rehearse it, but I thought, he'd just come up and we'd kind of say, just for camera. He ran up, and he was out of breath and he was sweating, But when he got there, I was so shocked. I went, oh! And I'm really sorry, which meant he had to run the game. And I was like, oh my God, Chiwetel, you were like really a slave, and it freaked me out. So I had to go, okay. But it worked because I could not have any awareness of their world or any feelings about it because she lived in her own kind of space. So the one thing that I did do is I decided to work on dialect. So I tried to incorporate, because everybody was coming from different places. Like in the Gullah Islands off South Carolina, there's still people that probably speak closer to the African tongues than before. And so I knew some Gullah. I decided that I'd come in from that direction. There, and New Orleans is just like that, a gumbo. That's why they have gumbo. It's, you've got French, you've got Spanish, you've got West Indian. So I started to toy with mixing the sounds, and also her trying to put on airs to be what she had seen before, tossing in some words, but not quite having the hang of how they come out. So just subtly with dialogue, but that's usually how I put a character together.
Thank you.
As everyone else, thank you so much for this movie. I come from the southern United States where I grew up, and it's always been something that haunts me, this subject matter, because every time I'm more angry. So the scene where Platt is hanging and slave life is going on behind, children are playing, and I know there's part of that was instituted probably, they couldn't look at him. I wondered how much of that was in the book, or was that inspired by improvisation or the director's input?
It was a mixture of things, really. I think a lot of it is in the book. I think the children was something that Steve put in, if I remember, I think so. At the on the day. I think it was something. Steve was very interested in. The book is so. Obviously, we had to truncate the book a lot, and what that means is there were certain sequences that had to kind of speak to wider things than we could put into the film. The nature of the book, and I mean, as Jeremy was saying earlier, it's an extraordinary biography. It's extraordinary, and there are so many details that we couldn't put into 2 hours. So there were things that we had to kind of come up with that represented the kind of emotional journey that people were going on in different ways. And I think Steve was just trying to find different images that could represent not only the physical torture, but also the psychological torture that was happening, and how that society was sort of working and was controlled. So he used different elements. I mean, we tried to make a film that was a very, very accurate representation of the book, and also give more of the scope that the book has that we couldn't necessarily fit into the 2 hours.
The institution of slavery has had such a lasting direct impact on American culture, American life, and it's something that if we're not always the most informed about, we're still always kind of remember. But I also was struck by how many people in the movie, involved with the movie, were not American, but people who grew up surrounded by this reminders of this institution versus people who kind of heard about it maybe secondhand, maybe who experienced it in different ways from across the Atlantic or...
Yeah, I think we were all very connected to this experience, in the kind of, it's just the way that slavery globally worked, basically, in terms of West Africa, which is where my family come from, Igbo people. Hundreds of thousands of Igbos are taken out of the Bight of Benin. I was in Calabar just before coming over to shoot the film, which is in the east of Nigeria, at a slavery museum, which had a roll call of the number of Igbos that were taken out of that particular port. So it was never something that I felt any distance from in that way. Obviously, growing up in London and the nature of the slave trade in the West Indies and how that affected not only that area, but then also Britain and the nature of the sort of industrialization of Britain, France, Portugal, then into South America. I mean, the slavery was international, and this story is very specifically American, but speaks to so many things that are kind of wider than that, and it always felt to me correct. I didn't, there was always a kind of question whether you can legitimately tell other stories in that way, and I felt like you can because by definition it's correct that there's an international element to the story. I think 95% of the people who made this film are American, but it always felt right to me that there were elements and strong elements that represented the fact that this it wasn't just an American phenomenon, and it's about people, about our collective history in Europe and the States and Africa.
I'd love to add on to that question just really quickly. How has the movie been received in places like Nigeria, Kenya, Britain, France?
Well, it's not out in Africa
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
So we don't yet know, but there's definitely a lot of
interest,
buzz and interest online, a lot of support from what has been heard from over here and in the UK.
It's the number one film in the UK.
Oh, congratulations!
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yes, please.
No, something that I remembered while you were talking. Do you guys realize that we were a slave economy longer than we were anything else, but yet we deny that? So that's why we're off balance.
Well, thank you. And thank you to the cast and the producers for making this great film. Good luck this awards season. We know that there's a lot of great things to come, and we want to thank you for spending time with us at Google LA.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.